This happened when I was about 15 years old, back in 2008. My parents had gone out to the casino for the night, so it was just me and my dog, Abby, home alone. It was around 11 p.m. and I was chatting with friends on Instant Messenger while watching YouTube videos. As I was typing, I suddenly heard Abby barking in the living room. At first, I thought my parents might have returned, so I waited. But after about a minute of continuous barking and no sound of the door opening, I decided to check. When I entered the living room, I saw Abby facing the windows that looked out onto our driveway, still barking. The outside lights were off, making it too dark to see clearly. Peering through the glass, I only saw our one car in the driveway, confirming that my parents hadn't arrived yet. I assumed Abby had reacted to a neighbor's car door slamming or a loud vehicle passing by since we lived on a busy street. I went back to my computer, but over the next 5 minutes I kept getting the eerie feeling that I was hearing noises outside. Abby would stop barking, then suddenly start up again. I was about to get up to calm her down when I distinctly heard a knock or a rustling sound near the living room door. My heart skipped a beat. I slowly made my way back to the windows and looked outside again. Nothing. A nervous chill ran through me, and I was too afraid to check the peephole, worried I might see a terrifying face staring back. I made sure the door was locked and was just about to leave the room when, out of nowhere, knocking came from the side door of the house. My pulse raced. Was it my parents locked out and trying to get in? Or was it someone trying to break in? Worse, was there more than one person? Before I could process those thoughts, I suddenly heard the sound of the basement doorknob rattling, as if someone was trying to force it open. Our basement entrance was hidden. You had to go all the way around the house, through the backyard and under the deck to even find it. Whoever was down there either knew about it already or was extremely determined to get inside. Abby was now whimpering and barking furiously, running from room to room. It felt like we were surrounded. Then the sounds from the basement suddenly stopped, making my stomach drop. I held my breath, frozen in the silence. Seconds later, Abby bolted down the stairs, growling in a way I had never heard before. She was usually a friendly, gentle black lab, but in that moment she sounded absolutely ferocious. I stood there paralyzed until my body finally reacted. Realizing Abby had stopped barking, I called her upstairs and immediately locked the door leading to the basement. Grabbing the home phone, we didn't have cell phones yet, I ran into my parents' closet where they kept one of their guns. Sitting there, armed and ready, I was about to dial 911 when suddenly I heard the front door open. Abby sprinted out. I yelled after her, but then heard the voices of my parents. I rushed to the living room to find them petting Abby and looking at me with confusion. Shaking, I recounted the entire night's events. My mom was horrified, while my dad immediately grabbed his gun and spent the next hour checking every part of the house, inside and out. But he found nothing. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next afternoon, there was a knock at the front door. My heart jumped, and I instinctively ducked into another room. My dad answered it and found my Uncle Pete standing there, holding an envelope. Uncle Pete was, to put it lightly, a creepy guy. He always treated my aunt badly and made everyone, especially the kids, uncomfortable at family gatherings. Nothing illegal as far as we knew, but he just gave off an unsettling vibe. Even adults admitted he made them uneasy. Growing up, I always felt on edge around him. His daughter, my cousin Kate, played softball in a younger league than mine, and since I liked her, I would sometimes help her team with pitching and fielding. From another room, my mom and I eavesdropped as Uncle Pete said something like, "I tried to stop by last night to drop this off, but no one was home." I couldn't hear much else, but moments later we heard my dad slam the door shut. My mom and I peeked out, asking what had happened. My dad, his face red with anger, told us that Uncle Pete had been the one sneaking around the house the night before, trying to get inside. He handed me the envelope, and inside was a card with a gift card as a thank you for helping his daughter. A whole night of terror, all because of my creepy uncle. My dad had threatened him during their conversation, and after that, we never saw much of him again. Even now, I still have so many questions. What was he thinking? Why did he feel the need to drop off that card so late at night? Why didn't he get the hint that we weren't home when no one answered? Why wouldn't he just call the house instead? I've always enjoyed solitude. That's why, 5 years ago, I moved to a small cabin in rural upstate New York, far away from the chaos of city life. The place is big, secluded, and surrounded by dense woods stretching for miles beyond my property. My nearest neighbor is several miles away, and the only sounds I usually hear are the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional chirping of birds. It's peaceful, just the way I like it. Fishing is my favorite pastime. I spend most of my days by the lake just behind my cabin, escaping from everything. I don't mind being alone. Honestly, I prefer it. The cabin has a large deck overlooking the woods, and I often sit there with a cold beer in hand, watching the sun dip behind the trees and listening to the sounds of the forest at night. It's always been peaceful until recently. It all started about 2 weeks ago. I was sitting on the deck, gazing into the darkness, when I heard something, a twig snapping in the distance. At first, I dismissed it, probably just a deer or a raccoon. The woods are full of life, and over the years I've grown used to the usual nighttime noises. But as the days went on, the sounds became more frequent. At first, it was just the occasional rustling of leaves or another snapping twig, things I could easily explain away. Then one night I heard something different, a scratching sound. It came from the side of the house near the window of the spare bedroom. It was quiet, almost like whoever, or whatever was making it, was trying to be stealthy. My heart started to race as I stood up from my chair and listened intently. After a while, the sound stopped. Probably just a squirrel, I told myself, but something about it felt off. I decided to go inside and lock up for the night. The following evening, it happened again. The scratching. This time, it wasn't just by the side of the house. It was closer. It sounded like it was coming from right outside the spare bedroom window. I froze, straining to listen. My nerves were starting to fray. I couldn't explain it, but something about the sound sent a chill through me. I walked to the window, hesitated for a moment, then pulled the curtain back slightly. The moonlight cast long shadows across the yard. Everything seemed still, normal. No animals, no people. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just a branch brushing against the glass, or maybe the wind playing tricks on me. There was no reason to be scared. I locked the window and went to bed. The next night, the sound returned. But this time, it wasn't just scratching. It was light tapping, like someone was deliberately trying to get my attention. My chest tightened and I bolted upright in bed. Grabbing my flashlight, I crept down the dark hallway toward the spare bedroom. When I reached the window, I hesitated before shining the light outside. Nothing. No animals, no people, just the same empty woods. But the air around me felt heavy, suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. Every tiny sound seemed amplified, the creaking floorboards, the rustling wind outside. My mind raced with possibilities. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The nights passed and the noises didn't stop. Every night I heard them, the scratching, the tapping, and sometimes a faint whisper. It seemed to come from inside the walls. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting harder. One night I decided I'd had enough. I needed to figure out what was causing it. Maybe it was an animal that had somehow gotten inside. I grabbed a crowbar from the shed just in case. Steeling myself, I walked into the spare bedroom. The air inside felt stale, like the room hadn't been touched in months. I hadn't used it in ages. I shone my flashlight around, scanning every corner. Nothing. Just an empty room. I sighed, feeling foolish. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. The closet door. It was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it open. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Slowly, I stepped closer and pulled the door open. Nothing. Just an empty closet. But as I aimed the flashlight at the back corner, I noticed something. A small piece of torn fabric caught on the edge of the wall. It was dark, frayed, like it had been ripped from someone's clothing. My breath hitched. My thoughts raced. Had someone been inside my house? I backed away, my pulse hammering. Slamming the bedroom door shut, I locked it. I couldn't stay here. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I rushed outside, hoping the crisp night air would clear my head, but the darkness of the forest felt suffocating. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe the isolation was finally getting to me. That night, I slept on the couch, gripping a baseball bat. But the noises didn't come. No scratching, no tapping, nothing. It was too quiet. The next night, I decided to stand my ground. I wasn't going to let fear drive me out of my own home, but just as I was about to drift off, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap against the window. I shot up, heart pounding, and grabbed my flashlight. This time, I wasn't careful. I ran to the spare bedroom, throwing the curtain back, and then I saw it. A shadow. Someone was standing outside the window, barely visible in the dim moonlight. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My mind spun with questions. Who was that? What did they want? How long had they been watching me? A cold dread washed over me. I turned on my heels, sprinting for the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. When the operator answered, my voice came out in a frantic whisper. "Someone's outside my house," I choked out. "I think they're still here." I gave my address and they assured me help was on the way. But I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. And then I heard it. A slow creak from the hallway. Someone was inside. I didn't wait. I bolted for the back door, flinging it open and running into the woods. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my vision blurring. By the time I reached the edge of the property, I saw the flashing lights of police cars cutting through the darkness. I stopped, trembling, hiding behind a tree as I watched officers storm the house, weapons drawn. But I didn't stay to find out what they discovered. I couldn't, because deep down I knew the truth. Whoever had been watching me, they weren't finished, and they were still out there. When I was 22, I decided to rent the downstairs apartment in my parents' house to save money while also having a bit more privacy. Even though my parents were often away, I still felt like I had no personal space and couldn't invite friends or girls over without feeling watched. The downstairs apartment was separated from the main house by a lockable door in the stairway. It had an open layout with a small kitchen connected to the living room area. A hallway led to my bedroom, bathroom, laundry room, and a side entrance through the living room. One weekend, when my parents were out of town, I had my friends Anthony and Jay over. We were just hanging out, having some drinks, and watching the hockey game. Since my parents weren't home, we blasted music while we chilled. I wouldn't say I got completely drunk, but I had a good buzz by the end of the game. Since I didn't have to worry about my parents coming downstairs, I usually left the door between my apartment and the main house unlocked. I also kept our drinks in the upstairs fridge because it was bigger and more convenient. Since both Anthony and Jay had been drinking, they decided to stay over for the night. The couch downstairs was huge, big enough to comfortably sleep 3 people if they positioned themselves right. After a long night of drinking, I said goodnight and went to my room. A few hours later, I woke up in the middle of the night. I immediately heard footsteps coming from upstairs. I figured it was probably Anthony or Jay going to the fridge for some cold water, so I didn't let it bother me and tried to go back to sleep. But just a few minutes later, I heard the doorknob to my bedroom turning. Someone was trying to open it, but it was locked. I always locked my bedroom door out of habit. I wondered why either of them would be trying to come in, but I was too tired to care. I figured if I stayed quiet and acted like I was asleep, they'd just go back to sleep too. It worked, and I drifted off shortly after. The next morning, Anthony had already left, but Jay was still asleep on the couch. When he heard me open the fridge, he started waking up. I asked if he had tried to come into my room last night, and he said he didn't think so, but wasn't sure because he had been pretty drunk. We grabbed some breakfast from a nearby deli and ate it in my backyard before he headed out. I didn't even bother asking Anthony if it was him, since it didn't seem like a big deal. I spent most of that Saturday out with other friends and didn't come home until late at night. I wasn't really drunk since it had been a long day, and I had sobered up by then. I was exhausted, so I had a snack, washed up, and went straight to bed. I watched something on TV for about an hour before turning it off. Right away, I heard noises, creaks and soft thuds from upstairs, almost like footsteps. They sounded exactly like the ones from the night before, coming from the kitchen area above me. I listened closely, but the sound stopped. My heart was beating faster. I felt a bit uneasy, but after a few minutes of silence, I convinced myself it was just the house settling. I couldn't have been more wrong. I should have trusted my gut. Then I heard it again, the doorknob to my bedroom turning. But this time I jumped up immediately, my adrenaline kicking in. The doorknob turned for a few seconds, just like the previous night, but then I heard something new, a light knock on the door. My heart pounded. I didn't say a word. I reached for my phone and started texting my family, along with Anthony and Jay. I knew the chances of it being one of them were almost zero, but I still hoped one of them would reply and say it was just a prank. My parents didn't answer. They must have been asleep. They weren't supposed to be back until Monday. I wasn't about to call out and ask, "Who's there?" Instead, I quietly grabbed a blunt object and hid behind the corner of my dresser, just in case whoever was outside decided to force their way in. I stayed frozen like that for 10 whole minutes, barely breathing. No more knocking. Finally, I called 911 and whispered as quietly as I could while still being audible. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher until the police arrived. Since I didn't feel safe leaving my room, I asked the dispatcher to have the officers meet me at my bedroom window. A few minutes later, I heard a tap on the glass. Thank God I was on the first floor. I handed the officer the key to the side door, and moments later I heard them enter my apartment. Only then did I leave my bedroom. 2 officers were there, and I turned on all the lights. My apartment was small with very few hiding spots, so their search downstairs was quick. Then we moved up to the main floor and checked every room. Nothing. Finally, we went upstairs. I told them which rooms belonged to whom as they searched. When they entered my parents' bedroom, I heard a sudden commotion. My stomach dropped. 30 seconds later, I peeked inside and saw 2 officers yelling at someone hiding under my parents' bed. My blood ran cold. I was told to wait downstairs. Minutes later, the officers came down, escorting a tall, dirty man in a sweatshirt and shorts. He looked terrifying, disheveled, wild-eyed. They asked if I knew him. Of course I didn't. He glared at me with such hatred that it made my skin crawl. He looked like he could have been homeless, mentally unstable, or both. Once they took him out of the house, I felt an immense wave of relief. The police said that if my family wanted to press charges or follow up, we should call the precinct. After they left, the first thing I did was text every friend and family group chat I had. Since it was late, only a few people responded. The next morning, I called my parents to tell them everything. They were shocked, as anyone would be. But since the man was homeless and nothing appeared to be stolen, they chose not to pursue legal action. Looking back, I think it's possible that I left the front door unlocked the night Jay and Anthony came over, and the man just walked in while we were blasting music. Or, even scarier, he might have been inside for much longer, and we just never knew.